So far, we've kept all of our work to a single node, and whilst we're just picking up the tools, that's fine. But in any real-world project, we're going to have to start organising our grade in the node tree to get an image to where we want it to be. On the upper right of the screen here, we've got the node tree. There are a few basic things to note down first. The node tree essentially shows us a chart of our original source image, all the colour transforms it goes through, and then how that goes through to the final output, which in most cases is what we see in the image viewer in the centre of the screen. The green dot on the left-hand side here is our RGB input. This is essentially our base image. It's what we've imported into Resolve, and it's the clip we currently have active in the timeline, the clip that we're working on. We then have a line that travels from our RGB input to our first node, and believe it or not, some people call this a noodle. We then have another noodle going from our first node to our second node, and then finally a noodle going from our second node all the way to our RGB output on the right side of the node tree. What this is telling us is that our base image is going through two sets of colour transforms that are stored in nodes 1 and 2, and then the resulting image is being passed through to our RGB output, and as a result we are seeing that new image in our viewer. Now, the first node we have here is the most simple kind of node in Resolve, and it's the one we're going to be working with almost constantly. It's called a serial node. A serial node contains a series of colour transforms or adjustments, applies them to the image that it receives through its own RGB input, which is the green triangle on the left-hand side, and then passes it out through its own RGB output, which is the green box on the right-hand side, either to another node or all the way through to the RGB output on the far right of the node tree. As long as serial nodes simply progress from left to right, they act in much the same way as adjustment layers on Photoshop stacked on top of each other. Each subsequent version of our image, resulting from the adjustments performed by each node, is then subject to a new set of adjustments. This process continues until the image is passed through to our main RGB output and we see the resulting image in the viewer in the centre of our screen. Putting this into practice, we have two serial nodes here. The first is our primary contrast and saturation, and the second is our colour balance. Now, we can turn a node off, and there are two ways to do that. You can either click on the number, and that will turn it off, or you can highlight a node, and then hit Control or Command, and then D, and that will turn the currently active selected node off. If you want to turn every node off and on at once, then hold Alt, and then hit D. Here we can see the before and after of the grade, the raw image, and after we performed the colour grade. This is a bit like a math exercise we used to do in primary school called the function machine, which is essentially a long sum. We've got a starting image, we add 15 to make it brighter, subtract 20 to make it darker, multiply, divide, all of that stuff, and then we end up with a number which represents our final image, kind of. We end up with an enormous series of numbers that represent our final image, but the basic logic is the same. So we're going to talk quickly about how to organise a grade whilst you're working, and this is especially good for people who are beginning in the grade. Now, we can collapse a large number of adjustments and functions into a single node, but when you're just starting out, it actually pays to separate them out into multiple nodes. That way you have a stronger idea of what's actually going on in your grade, and it's easier for you to keep organised as you're working. So what I recommend you do is that you divide your nodes up and you organise by goals. So when I say that, I mean to say that our first node here is our primary contrast and saturation. It doesn't do anything with colour balance. So that's our goal. My goal for this first node would be to set my shadows, set my highlights, and set my saturation. We're not going to put anything else in here. We're not going to put any fancy selections or any other secondary curves or anything we haven't covered yet. We're not going to put anything else in here. This node has now served its purpose. We're going to create a new node. Now we can create a new serial node two ways. We can right click in an empty part of the node tree, mouse over add node, and then hit corrector. That'll add a new serial node. That then needs to be added into the current node tree, and to do that you can drag and drop it on top of the noodle and it will then insert itself in there. If you want to get rid of a node, highlight the node in the node tree, click it once, and an orange border denotes the currently active node. Then just hit the delete key and it will go. The easier and quicker way, and more practical way to add a serial node, especially to a linear grade, is simply to hold Alt and hit S for serial. That will automatically add another serial node and then also add it into the node tree that you're building. You don't have to drag and drop or disconnect a noodle and then drag a new one. If you want to disconnect a noodle, click the right half, the blue part, and then it will disappear. If you want to draw a connection, you click at the starting point, left click, and then you drag and then you let go on the finishing point on the connection you want to make, and then you've made a connection that way. So, back to the original point. We had two main goals in this primary grade. We wanted to set our contrast and saturation, and then we wanted to set our color balance. So what we do is we do our primary grade, our primary contrast grade, and then when we've done that, we hold Alt and hit S to make a new node, and then in this node, we then do our color balance. So we use the primary wheels to level out the shadows, make them more neutral, level out the sky a little bit, add a bit more warmth to our mids, bring out his skin. We want to be careful, we don't want it to go a weird purple, we don't want the water to look muddy, we don't want the sky to go a rusty colour, so we just need to exercise some restraint here. And it is a cold greyish day. And then a little bit more saturation. Now, if our client comes back and says, well actually I quite like it blue, I don't want you to make it neutrally balanced, rather than go back into our first node and have to manually reset our wheels, all we have to do is click our color balance node, click on the number. You don't have to click on a node and then click the number to deactivate it. You can just click the number directly and it will turn off. Now, as you can see, this is a much more logical and organized way to work. It allows you to maintain tight control of aspects of your grade at all times. It doesn't mean that you have to go back into a node that has, I don't know, 4 or 5 tools working at once and manually drag things back into position, which is a very unreliable way to reset a grade. It allows us to basically work incrementally. We can then add versions. We can add new corrections and submit new versions of this grade to our client and get feedback on that, and then if they don't like it, it's very easy to remove, or then if they change their mind again later, and that does happen, it's also very easy to reinstate just by, just with a single click, not with a load of having to try and manually repeat steps you've taken before. So this was a decent introduction to the node tree. We're going to be using it constantly from here on out, and as we cover more advanced aspects of organization as well as nonlinear nodes, we'll go into much greater detail with those as we come across them in later projects. When you're ready, click on